Picture this. You're sitting in a meeting room. Your manager slides a laptop across the table and says 3 words. Fix this formula. You open the file. It's a macro-enabled spreadsheet, the kind with hundreds of lines of automation running underneath it, the kind an entire department depends on every single week. You click the button that's supposed to run the macro, nothing happens. You click it again, still nothing. And in that silence, you realize something that no tech video ever tells you before you try it yourself. Switching your work laptop to Linux in an office built entirely around Windows is not a settings change. It's a decision that quietly puts you on a different island than everyone else in the building, and the bridgeback only works some of the time. That's exactly what happened to someone who tried it for 30 straight days. And today, we're going through what actually happens when you take that leap in a real corporate environment. Not a home office, not a personal project, but a desk in the middle of a Windows-only company. Stick around, because the parts nobody talks about are the parts that matter most. If you're new to Nolan Tech, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we upload new tech videos regularly that help you stay ahead. Let's set the scene properly, because the way this kind of experiment usually starts says a lot about how it plays out. It's rarely a dramatic moment. Nobody wakes up one day furious at Windows and nukes their work machine out of spite. It's slower than that. It creeps in. Maybe you've used Windows your entire working life, XP as a kid, 7 on your first job, 10 or 11 on whatever laptop the company handed you, and somewhere along the way, you start reading about Linux out of simple curiosity. Not with a real plan, just the way you might read about learning a new language or moving somewhere new, a thing that sounds interesting in theory and almost certainly won't actually happen to you specifically. Except the more you read, the more it starts making sense. Linux tends to run leaner on older hardware. It doesn't quietly nibble away at your storage with software you never asked for. There's no telemetry sending your habits back to a company that wants to sell you a subscription. It's maintained by people who mostly just want the thing to work well, not to upsell you on cloud storage every time you open a settings menu. Urgencies. And if you've got an old laptop lying around that Windows has slowly turned into a machine that takes 4 minutes to boot and another 5 minutes quietly installing updates before you can actually use it, that gap between theory and reality gets very tempting to close. So say you do it. One weekend you download a current long-term support release of Ubuntu, write it to a USB drive, and install it on that old laptop. The installation takes half an hour, maybe less, depending on your hardware. When it finishes, that old machine feels new again. Everything opens fast. Nothing's running in the background that you didn't explicitly put there. And on Monday morning, you carry that laptop into the office, set it down next to your desk phone, and think one very specific, very dangerous sentence: this is going to be easy. That thought is the last easy thought you get to have for a while. The first day is where the honeymoon phase lives, and it's a real thing, not an exaggeration. The desktop boots in seconds. It's clean, minimal, nothing wasted on the screen. The browser opens almost instantly, noticeably faster than that same hardware ever managed on Windows. You open a browser-based document, type something, save it, no problems. You send a test email through the web client, also fine. You pull up a video just to check it plays, and it does, immediately. And sitting there on a Monday morning with a machine that feels genuinely fast for the first time in years, you start wondering why anyone bothers with Windows at all. This is better, you think. And you believe it completely, because at that exact moment, you haven't touched a single piece of the actual infrastructure the office runs on yet. That infrastructure is where things start to get complicated. And the first place it shows up is the most basic thing imaginable: the shared network drive. Most offices run their files off a central server that every Windows machine connects to automatically the moment it boots. You open File Explorer, click the mapped drive in the sidebar, and your files are right there in about 3 seconds. Most people in that office have never once thought about how that connection actually works, because it's always just worked, silently, in the background, since the day IT set up their machine. On Linux, that convenience disappears completely. You open the file manager, look for a way to connect to a network location, and type in the server address using whatever format seems reasonable. A box pops up asking for a domain, a username, and a password. You enter them exactly the way you always have. Connection failed. You try a different address format. Failed. You try putting the domain before the username with a backslash, the way Windows expects it. Failed. You try adding the network protocol prefix directly to the address. Still failed. This is a task that takes a Windows machine 3 seconds. And now you've burned through the better part of 2 hours on your very first day trying to make it work at all. Eventually, buried somewhere in an old forum thread, you find the exact syntax your specific server setup needs. You type it into a terminal window, hit enter, and there it is. The network drive appears in your file manager like nothing ever happened. Here's the part that really sets the tone for everything that follows. That fix isn't permanent. On a lot of setups, that connection quietly drops overnight and has to be manually reestablished every single morning. So you write the command down, Maybe on a sticky note stuck to the edge of your monitor. Maybe in a notes app you keep open at all times. And you understand, right there on day one, that this isn't a one-time fix. It's going to become a daily ritual, something you do before you do anything else, every single morning, for as long as this experiment lasts. By day 3, you've built a routine around it. Fragile, full of steps that shouldn't have to exist, but a routine nonetheless. Open the laptop, run the network drive command, check if today's the day the VPN decides to misbehave, open the browser, get your messaging app tab going. And speaking of the VPN, that's where day 4 takes a sharp turn, because remote access software built for corporate networks tends to have one very specific relationship with Linux. It technically exists, but it lives a step behind. Cisco's secure client software, the kind most companies use for encrypted remote access, does have a Linux build. That part's true. But it tends to trail behind the Windows version in features and update frequency. And more importantly, IT departments almost universally build and test their server-side configuration around Windows and Mac clients specifically. Nobody in the history of a lot of these companies has ever connected a Linux machine to that VPN before, not once. So you open a support ticket. A few people from IT come by your desk and you watch a very specific look move across their faces the moment they see your desktop. Not rude, not dismissive, just the expression of someone who confidently opened a door they thought they knew and found a completely different room on the other side. And then comes the sentence you were half expecting from the very beginning. We officially only support Windows and Mac. You knew that was coming. Knowing it was coming doesn't make it comfortable to sit there while 3 people stare at your unfamiliar desktop, trying to figure out what to do with you. After some digging, IT teams and Linux users in this situation usually land on an open source alternative client that can talk to the same VPN servers using compatible protocols. It connects, not as smoothly as the official client, occasionally dropping during longer sessions, but it connects, and that's enough to keep working. From that point forward, getting online every morning means running a specific sequence of commands in a terminal window, memorized or copied from a notes file kept open at all times. And here's a mistake that's incredibly easy to make once you get comfortable. One morning you trust your memory instead of checking the file, type one character wrong, and the connection fails completely silently. No error message, no warning. You just sit there working, wondering why a shared document won't load for 40 minutes before you realize you were never actually connected to anything. 40 minutes gone to a typo that a Windows machine would have flagged instantly with a clear error message. That's the tax nobody mentions in the tutorials, because the people making those tutorials already know every command by heart. They filmed this video after they'd already solved the problem, not while they were living inside it. Then there's team messaging and video calls, and this is genuinely one of the more surprising landmines in the whole experience. For years, Microsoft actually maintained a native Linux version of Teams. It lived in the taskbar like a proper application, handled calls and messaging reasonably well, and felt like a real piece of software rather than an afterthought. Then, a few years back, Microsoft discontinued that native Linux app entirely and pointed everyone toward the browser version instead. And to be fair, the browser version genuinely works. You can join calls, send messages, share your screen, get into shared files. All the core functionality is there. But there's a difference that matters enormously in a fast-moving office between an application that lives in your taskbar and pushes real-time notifications to your screen, and a browser tab you have to remember to actively check. In a Windows Office, that messaging app is pinned to every single taskbar. New messages pop up instantly. Meeting reminders appear on screen whether the app is in focus or not. A little badge on the icon tells you at a glance that something needs attention without you opening anything at all. The browser version, sitting in a tab, competes with every other tab you have open for your attention. Messages arrive and sit there, unread, until you happen to click over and look. Picture missing a meeting? Because a last-minute time change got sent through a notification system that pops up instantly on every Windows taskbar in the building except yours. Because yours is a browser tab buried behind 3 other windows. You join 12 minutes late, apologize, and the meeting moves on. But it clarifies something you've been feeling in smaller ways every single day. When you're the only person in an office running a different platform, you're also the only person who doesn't automatically receive the things everyone else assumes correctly that everyone receives at all times, and nobody adjusts their behavior for you, because why would they? Everything they're doing already works perfectly for every other person in the room. Email tells a similar story. The web version of most enterprise email systems has genuinely become quite capable for the basics, and it'll handle your day-to-day fine without much complaint. But the full desktop version on Windows has layers of integration with the rest of the operating system that you don't even register as features, because they're so deeply woven into your daily workflow that they just feel like reality. Meeting reminders that appear on screen even when the app is minimized. A tray icon showing your unread count at all times without opening anything. right-clicking any file anywhere on your computer and attaching it to a message in 3 seconds, seeing a colleague's real-time availability directly in the Compose window before you even schedule a meeting, a calendar that syncs automatically with the little clock widget in the corner of your screen. On the browser version, every one of those tiny invisible automations turns into a manual multi-step process. Sending a file to a colleague means confirming the network drive connected properly that morning, navigating to the file, downloading it locally, opening the browser, navigating to the webmail client, waiting for the session to load or logging back in if it's expired, clicking new message, clicking attach, finding the file you just downloaded and sending. That whole sequence takes close to 2 minutes. On Windows, the same task takes about 10 seconds. If you're sending files to colleagues even a dozen times a day, and over the course of a month that adds up to real hours, potentially more than a full working day lost purely to friction that doesn't exist on the platform everyone else is using. Now, let's talk about printers, because printers deserve their own dedicated conversation. They came closer to derailing this whole idea than almost anything else. Picture a big office with a few large networked multifunction printers, the kind used constantly all day by everyone. On Windows, you open Settings, search for printers, click Add a Printer, and the network printers show up automatically in a discovery list within about 10 seconds. You click one, the driver installs itself quietly in the background, and inside 2 minutes you're printing, including the time it takes to type your password. That's roughly how long it took a colleague to go from unboxing a brand new laptop to printing her first page. On Linux, automatic discovery might find 1 printer out of 3 if you're lucky. You add it, accept whatever generic driver the system offers, and send a test print. The job sits in the queue, the printer's light turns green like it's ready, and then nothing comes out. It just sits there for several minutes before quietly vanishing from the queue as if it was never submitted at all. You dig into the print management interface, try different driver options, different connection types, still nothing. After digging through forum threads and driver compatibility databases, you might discover that a specific printer model needs a particular driver file that isn't included in the default package set, buried in some years-old forum post. You install it manually through the terminal, print a test page, and it finally works. There's a real, slightly embarrassing satisfaction in that moment, and the satisfaction of someone who just spent an hour accomplishing what a Windows machine does automatically in under 2 minutes. Then you print something that actually matters, a client-facing document that needs to go out that afternoon, and the margins are off, cutting a chunk of the footer clean away. You adjust and reprint, still off. Third attempt, finally correct, while someone's standing behind you waiting for their turn on the printer, watching you print the same page 3 times. And the other printers in the building? In a lot of these situations, they never get reliably solved at all. From that point forward, the workaround becomes sending files to a colleague and asking them to print it for you, and eventually you stop even framing it as a favor. It just quietly becomes how printing works for you specifically, which, if you sit with that for a second, is a fairly complete form of defeat dressed up as a routine. Now, the moment that actually cracks the whole thing open, the one that started this video, is worth walking through properly, because it gets at something deeper than any individual compatibility issue. Open source Office suites are genuinely solid software for regular spreadsheets, normal formulas, charts, standard formatting. Compatibility with modern spreadsheet file formats is good in most everyday cases, but macro-enabled workbooks exist in a completely different category entirely. The scripting language built into Excel, the one corporate teams use to automate hours of manual work into a single button click, is Microsoft's own language, tightly coupled to Microsoft's own software. Open source suites have their own macro language, related in concept, built on similar ideas, but not the same language, and not fully compatible. So when you open a macro-enabled file in an open source spreadsheet program and click the button that's supposed to trigger the automation, one of 3 things happens. Sometimes it just works. For simple macros that only rely on functions both languages happen to share. Sometimes, and this is genuinely the most dangerous outcome, it partially works and silently produces wrong results without any indication that anything went sideways at all. And sometimes it does absolutely nothing, which is exactly what happens in that meeting room at the start of this video. The macro references a function specific to the original software right in its very first line. The open source program hits a function, name it doesn't recognize, and just stops. No error dialog, no explanation, just silence, which from the outside looks completely identical to a button that simply isn't responding. Now imagine the moment right after that. Your manager is calm about it, hands you a Windows machine, you open the same file, the macro runs in 4 seconds flat, you fix the formula, the meeting wraps up. But what actually stays with you for the rest of that day isn't that one specific macro. It's the realization that you've spent weeks opening files that looked mostly correct on your screen, and sending them off to colleagues without ever confirming whether they rendered identically on the machines everyone else was using. That's the quiet, unsettling part. Not the failure itself, but the uncertainty about how many smaller, silent failures happened before you caught this one. If you're finding this useful so far, take a second to like the video and subscribe to Nolan Tech. It genuinely helps the channel keep making detailed, honest tech content like this, instead of the surface-level stuff that skips the parts that actually matter. There's also a social dimension to all of this that's easy to underestimate before you actually live through it. By the end of the first week, most of the office knows about the unfamiliar desktop. Not because anyone announced it, but because technology in a shared office is visible, and people notice when your screen doesn't look like theirs. The reactions tend to split in interesting ways. A handful of people get genuinely curious and ask real questions. What is this? Why'd you switch? Is it hard to use? A few of the younger colleagues get enthusiastic in a way that almost feels like validation for something they'd already been reading about themselves. But the most common reaction from most of the room is a kind of polite, mild concern. The look someone gives you when you mention taking a different route to work and they know something about that route, you apparently don't. Nobody's unkind about it. But there's a recurring quality to those conversations that can only be described as waiting, like people are curious to see how it plays out, but already quietly certain of the answer. At some point, probably after your own version of the macro incident, a colleague who's been at the company for over a decade might stop by your desk, glance at your screen, and ask, in a completely non-judgmental way, if it's still giving you trouble. And when you say yes, in a few specific ways, she nods slowly, like she'd already been expecting exactly that answer since the day you started. That kind of moment sticks with you, not because it's smug, it usually isn't, but because it comes from someone with enough experience in that specific environment that the outcome was obvious to her from the start. In a way, it simply wasn't obvious to you. The IT team deserves real credit here too, more than a passing mention. Every time you bring them a problem, and it happens more often than you'd like across a month like this, they help. They search for solutions with you, try different approaches, and never make you feel like you're wasting their time, even when, realistically, you probably are, at least some of the time. But here's something that becomes clearer the longer this goes on. An IT team's core job is keeping everyone productive and secure on the systems the company has officially chosen to support. When you bring in a device running something outside that scope, you're not just asking them to solve a technical problem, you're asking them to spend time and expertise on a platform they weren't trained on, weren't hired to support, and have no documented procedures for, all to help exactly one workstation out of the entire building. Every hour they spend helping you configure a VPN or troubleshoot a printer driver is an hour they're not spending on the infrastructure that everyone else in the company depends on every single day. That's not a criticism of them. It's a reframing of what you're actually asking for when you walk in the door with something unsupported. It's worth keeping an honest running list of the problems that pile up over a month like this, because a few of them are worth calling out directly and clearly. Cloud storage integration is a real weak point. Microsoft still hasn't shipped an official native sync client for its cloud storage platform on Linux, which means everything routes through the browser, and that means zero offline access. Now, all of that said, it would be dishonest to make this sound purely negative because a genuinely large chunk of it works beautifully. The terminal on Linux is a precise, powerful tool that makes a lot of the equivalent Windows tools feel like they were designed for people who aren't expected to do anything particularly serious. Development work, scripting, server interaction, file automation, all of it tends to be noticeably better. Every browser-based application runs flawlessly. Web-based documents, spreadsheets, email, project management tools. Essentially, any web app performs smoothly without complaint. Video calls through the browser stay reliable. The machine itself tends to be remarkably stable across a stretch like this. No random crashes, no freezing, no update forcing an unplanned restart in the middle of something important. Battery life is often noticeably better than the same hardware ever managed under Windows. If your job is primarily writing, research, communication, and browser-based tools, this kind of setup isn't just an acceptable alternative. In some very real ways, it's genuinely the better choice. The people who say Linux is ready for everyday use aren't wrong. They're just usually describing a narrower slice of work than what a typical corporate office actually requires day to day. There's usually a moment near the end of an experiment like this that crystallizes everything, and it tends to involve a deadline. Picture working on a client proposal all day in an open source word processor, everything looking clean and professional on your own screen, the company header laid out with a logo and neatly formatted contact columns. You save it, send it off for a manager's sign-off a couple minutes before the deadline, and almost immediately he's standing at your desk turning his screen toward you. The header's broken. The logo's gone entirely. What was a clean 3-column layout has collapsed into a single left-aligned block of text that looks abandoned halfway through. This kind of thing happens because different office suites can handle advanced text box and frame positioning differently, and certain layout styles have known rendering quirks between them. With only a few minutes before the deadline, there's no time to fix it properly in the original program without risking making it worse. So you sit down at a colleague's desk, open the file in the standard corporate software, rebuild the header in a few minutes, and send it from her machine instead. Nothing reaches the client incorrectly. But sitting back down at your own laptop afterward, having just watched your own document get fixed and sent from someone else's computer, there's a specific kind of exhaustion in that moment. Not dramatic, not a crisis, just the tired weight of working twice as hard as everyone around you to land in the exact same place, and nearly having that extra effort cause a visible failure on the most important document of the week. So what's the actual takeaway after living through something like this for a full month? It's not that the open source operating system is bad software. It genuinely isn't. It's well built, actively maintained, and cared for by people who want it to be good, not people trying to upsell you on something. Almost nothing that goes wrong in a scenario like this is really the software's fault. It happens because corporate offices are built, top to bottom, on infrastructure, tools, and assumptions designed around one specific operating system, and that infrastructure doesn't bend for a different platform no matter how capable that platform actually is. The VPN was configured for one kind of client. The printer drivers were bundled for one kind of detection. The macros were written in a language owned by one specific company. The IT team is trained, certified, and documented around one specific platform. None of that changes just because one laptop in the building is running something different. You can route around every single one of those walls, and you can, but you route around them manually, one at a time, paying a small cost in time and energy for each one every single day. And the real problem with that cost in a professional setting is that it never stays contained to just you. It spreads. A missed meeting costs several other people their time. A broken macro eats into a manager's afternoon. A proposal that nearly goes out with a broken header puts the company's reputation on the line over something that could have been avoided entirely with the standard tools everyone else was already using. When you run this kind of experiment inside a professional environment, the consequences don't belong only to you. They belong to everyone around you too, and that's the part that rarely makes it into the tutorial videos. If there's one real lesson worth taking from all of this, it's that these two platforms aren't actually enemies, and you don't have to pick a side and reject the other one entirely. Talk to experienced professionals who've used the open source route for years inside Windows-heavy companies, and almost all of them run the same way. The standard corporate platform is their primary daily driver for whatever the office actually requires, and the alternative as a secondary environment reserved specifically for development work, automation, scripting, anything where that tool chain genuinely outperforms the alternative. Not a replacement, a complement. A specialist tool pulled out specifically in the context where it actually wins. Because the point was never really to prove that an unsupported platform could technically survive inside a Windows-only office. The real goal is always just to get good work done. And in most corporate offices today, that still means working within Windows, not because it's objectively superior software in every category, but because the entire professional world was built around it, and that's not changing anytime soon. If you're genuinely curious about trying something like this yourself, and you probably should be, because understanding how a different operating system actually works teaches you things about computers that the platform you're used to tends to keep hidden from you. Do it on a personal machine. Do it on a second laptop, on weekends, on evenings. Somewhere the only person affected by your learning curve is you, and the only timeline that gets disrupted is your own. Build that understanding properly first, before bringing it into an environment where other people are depending on your output every single day. That's not backing away from the idea. That's the smart way to actually engage with it, because it's absolutely worth learning, worth using, worth every bit of the effort it takes. It just needs to happen somewhere. The experiments are yours to run and the failures are yours alone to absorb. Not in the middle of a meeting room with a manager sliding a broken spreadsheet across the table toward you. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe to Nolan Tech, and turn on notifications so you never miss future tech videos. What's the first thing you'd want to test before trying something like this on your own work machine? Let me know in the comments.